Good morning. We are 1 minute early, so I'm going to give it a minute. Got about a minute left. Then we'll get started. All right. Okay. It is 10 a.m. I know that a lot of folks check in after the fact, and that's okay. You know, people have places to be and jobs to do, but I want to honor the time of those who are here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we are going to be starting part 2, principle number 4, and that is going to be on page 84. And that's where we're going to start. And the topic is an easy way to become a good conversationalist. That's the title of this chapter. So he says here on page 84, he says, he's talking about this woman who he had met or he had talked to. And he was just trying to have a conversation. He was at a bridge party. A bridge party's card game, for those of you who don't know what bridge is. Bridge party, card game. And he doesn't play bridge, but he was there anyway. This woman doesn't play bridge either. And so he was just saying, okay, well, let's have a conversation. She said she was very interested in what he had to say. She talked about visiting Africa. He was genuinely curious about Africa and how her trip went. And then for the next, I forget how long he said, they talked about nothing but her trip to Africa. At the end of the whole entire thing, she was telling the people at the party how great of a conversationalist and how nice of a guy he was and how great he was. But in reality, all he had done is listened. So he says this: all she wanted was an interested listener so she could expand her ego and tell about where she had been. She wanted to just feel important, is the point. Page 85. And he says here, so I was called an interesting conversationalist. He says, why? I had hardly said anything at all. He says, what I had done is this. I had listened intently. And this is what we need to learn as we're going back into the real world and we're going to have to be communicating with other people. A lot of us have been spending a lot of time at home just watching TV and doing things like that. So this is an opportunity for us to listen and learn to listen well. So he says here, I had listened because I was genuinely interested, and the person listening felt it. Says that kind of listening is one of the highest compliments we can pay anyone. Says I told him, this gentleman who was a botanist, that I had been immensely entertained and instructed. I told him I wished I had his knowledge, and I do wish I had his knowledge. I told him that I should love to wander the fields with him, and I have, he says, I have actually wandered the fields with him and done this. I told him I must see him again, and I did see him again. He was genuinely interested. He genuinely wanted to know more about this guy and what his thoughts were. He says, I had him thinking of me as a good conversationalist, when in reality, I had been merely a good listener, and it encouraged him to talk. So Charles W. Eliot, he gives this quote. He says, exclusively attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that. I hear the siren outside. It must be the first Wednesday of the month. All right. I have a note in here, but I can't read it. So he gives another example here. Department store in Chicago. Almost lost a regular customer. It's an anecdote, but his book is anecdotes, tons of anecdotes. And he says she had spent several $1,000s every year at the store at this time, several $1,000s would have been more than several $1,000s. It would have been lots and lots of money, tens of thousands at this time, by comparison. And basically in this story, she had bought a jacket that was on sale, and when she brought it home, the jacket had a tear in the inside. So she brought it back and said, "Hey, there's a tear in this jacket." The customer service person said, "That's too bad." Basically, you bought it. It was on sale. You bought it. There's no returns. And she said, "I'm not trying to return it to get my money back. I'm just trying to return it to get the inside fixed. I bought it thinking it was new, not ripped." Anyway, she was so frustrated. She left and she was walking out the door and she was just never going to come back. And that's a problem for a business. If the person hates your store and is so angry they won't come back, that you lose out on all that income. So what he says is that the manager stepped in, heard the woman, listened to her, listened hard, intently, and cared about what she had to say. And knowing she was a good customer, he said, "Without a doubt, we will absolutely take care of you." But the thing is that would never have happened had he not known who she was and actually cared about who she was. He says, "Listening is just as important in one's home life as in the world of business." So very true. As I do marital counseling with folks and in my own marriage, as one of the things that I had to learn, as a new husband, was just to sit and listen and not give an opinion and not try to fix stuff. I found out that my beautiful wife, when she tells me things, she doesn't always want me to solve it. She just wants to tell me it. She just wants to get it off of her chest and just to say it out loud. And my man brain is a little slow on such things. So when I hear a complaint, I am constantly, my wheels are turning as I try to figure out, hey, what is it that I can do to solve it? And that's not the point, though. It says, doubtless, he moves on and he talks about the telephone company, this subscriber. Again, it's hard for us to wrap our brains around this, but long time ago, the guy was upset with the bill from the telephone company. I guess the equivalent would be like a cell phone company. And he had actually gotten to the point where he had sent letters to the Better Business Bureau, or the equivalent of that. He had started his own personal organization to combat this kind of recklessness, in his opinion. And he had tried very hard, and he was even suing the company. So finally, this one guy went out to talk with him and just wanted to sit down and just listen. And he says here, doubtless Mr. So-and-so had considered himself a holy crusader, defending the public rights against callous exploitation. But in reality, what he had really wanted was a feeling of importance. He got this feeling of importance at first by kicking and complaining. And again, we see today is social media. People go on social media and they complain and complain and complain about stuff, or they see what the newest thing is and they complain about it, when they oftentimes don't even have all the facts. They just are inundating this place with complaints, and they'll go to a business and they'll give it bad reviews, even though they've never even been there. I mean, I don't know how you give a review of something you've never actually experienced. And so they'll, give bad reviews for their product or their place because they heard something online. But what that does is that gives us a feeling of importance. It's a false feeling of importance, but it gives us a feeling of importance. And he's saying that's why this guy was doing this. So long story short, the gentleman went out, the guy met the guy and had a conversation with him, met with him multiple times, let the guy just kind of lay all of his stuff on him. And he listened and listened and listened, never asked anything, left, listened and listened and listened, never asked anything and left, listened and listened. Finally, I forget how many times he listened. The guy finally paid his bill, which was how the whole thing started, and got caught up on all the costs, and he dropped the charges, dropped this lawsuit. And the point is that he just wanted to be heard, and he wanted to be felt as though he was important. And here this company had sent a guy on their own dime to listen to him, and that's a big deal. Here he tells us about Isaac Marcosan, who was a journalist who had interviewed hundreds of celebrities. And he said, he declared that many people fail to make a favorable impression because they don't listen attentively. They have been so much concerned with what they are going to say next that they don't keep their ears open. And I know that I've fallen into that as well. It's so easy when you're in theology school, you're going to seminary, and when you're having a debate or a conversation with somebody and they're saying this, you oftentimes end up thinking, how am I going to answer that? As opposed to actually just listening. And so it's a hard lesson that I had to learn, and I'm still learning, but it's important to just listen and not try to figure out how you're going to answer. And the same thing goes for marital counseling. I've had to explain this for every couple I've ever counseled, is to listen, actually listen, attentively listen, actively listen, and not try to figure out a way to answer the whatever is being said. Just actually listen to the person. Then after they've gotten everything off their chest, whether or not it's ridiculous is beside the point, but just let them say everything they need to say so they feel valued, because they should feel valued. They're your spouse. He gives an example of Abraham Lincoln. He says, during the darkest hours of the Civil War, Lincoln wrote an old friend in Springfield, Illinois. Basically, he told his friend to come out. He was considering enacting the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was really struggling with it because he knew that it would kind of tear up America, because slavery was a big thing. And he knew it was going to be controversial. He knew it was going to be good and bad in many different ways. So he asked for his friend to come visit. His friend came to visit, and they shook hands, and then Lincoln basically talked to him all night long and never actually asked for his opinion at all. He just kind of talked about it. He said Lincoln had done all the talking himself that seemed to clarify his mind. In the end, Lincoln didn't want advice. He had wanted merely a friend, a sympathetic listener to whom he could unburden himself. That is frequently all the irritated customer wants, and the dissatisfied employee or the hurt friend. They just want to be listened to. And this is just a great example of just being able to talk. So sadly, I have no fellow pastors at church anymore. I had, Nick for a while, who was our music minister. I had Tyler, who was our youth minister. And when I had one or both of those guys, it was great, because when I was going through a sermon or a sermon series and I was stuck, I would oftentimes ask them a question during our weekly staff meeting. Hey, I'm really stuck on this. And I found out, Tyler pointed it out, but I found out after the fact that most of the time when I would basically be saying the situation out loud, and the majority of the time just saying it out loud and using somebody else as somebody you trust as a springboard for your conversation in your own head. And then you oftentimes end up just coming to a conclusion, and it's great. And I found that was so helpful. It's one of the things I really miss about having staff, is they're able to come to me and kind of bounce ideas. Speak of Abraham Lincoln, he's right behind me. They get to throw ideas at me and bounce ideas off of each other, and just that back and forth to be able to clarify our thoughts, as he says that Lincoln did here. It's great. So he says, if you want to know how to make people shun you and laugh at you behind your back or despise you, here's the recipe. Never listen to anyone for long. Talk incessantly about yourself. And that's hard, because we ourselves are our favorite topic, not because we're inherently selfish, I don't think. I think it's because we know ourselves better than anything else. So we like to talk about the things that we know about, and we're self-interested. Bores, that is all they are. Bores intoxicated with their own egos, drunk with a sense of their own importance. People who talk only of themselves think only of themselves. So you need to practice this and try very hard to listen. And so I read this chapter again 2 days ago, just to refresh my mind. And I practiced this yesterday. I had run into a gentleman. I've never met him before. struck up a conversation with him. And I tried very hard to just apply the principles that he says here, basically active listening and just listening and asking questions. And it was great. This guy and I talked for quite a while. He walked away very happy, telling me, oh, I'd love to visit the church and all this other stuff. And in reality, all I had really done was listen. He says, so if you aspire to be a good conversationalist, be an attentive listener. To be interesting, be interested. Ask questions that other persons will enjoy answering. And that's the hard part too. And it's part of the key is asking questions that they'll enjoy. I don't enjoy sports. I don't watch sports for the most part. I mean, I'll watch the Badgers or the Hawkeyes play or a Packer game or whatever. But I don't know who's playing on the team. I don't know who the coaches are. I don't know who they just drafted. And to be honest, I don't care. So it's hard for me sometimes to just make small talk with a lot of guys because they're really into that. But it's important to ask questions that they're actually interested in. And if you don't know anything about sports, you got to find something else. So if somebody wanted to massage my ego, they'd be like, hey, let's talk about philosophy, or hey, let's talk about religion or theology or something like that, because those are the things I enjoy, or camping or hiking or reading a book or whatever. I enjoy that kind of stuff. So he actually encourages people to do a little bit of research if you can. Even if you're going to meet somebody, find out what they like and just do a little bit of research and get yourself ready for the conversation. He says, encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments. He says, the people you are talking to are 100 times more interested in themselves and their wants and problems than they are with your problems. He says, a person's toothache, and this is really profound, but I believe it's absolutely true. He says, a person's toothache means more to them than the famine in China that's killing millions of people. And it's because it is hurting them. If you have a toothache, if you've ever had a toothache or back pain or something, I guarantee you think about the toothache or back pain more than you do starving children. And how awful is that to think about? But it's absolutely true. When you're laying in bed and you haven't got out of bed for a day and a half and your back is hurting, like Thomas right now is stuck at home because of his back surgery. He just had his staples removed, but he's in pain. And I guarantee you that he is thinking more about his back pain and trying to heal than he is about, whatever's going on around the planet. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's just that's what's at the forefront of your mind because it's your body and it's your feelings and it's your experiences. You can't help but think of those things first. He says, so principle number 4, be a good listener and encourage others to talk about themselves. Excellent. Very good principles to live by there. Number 5, how to interest people. Whenever Roosevelt expected a visitor, and I was leading into this with that comment a minute ago. Whenever Roosevelt expected a visitor, he sat up late the night before reading on the subjects he knew the guest was particularly interested in. He purposefully did that. He says, for Roosevelt knew that as all leaders know, that the royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the things he or she treasures most. So he would actually stay up and if he knew he was having a visitor, he would actually study topics that he knew the person liked. So if I knew that I was going to be meeting the wrestling coach for Iowa, I would do a little bit of research on him and try to figure out like what's the guy into. I had interviewed KGB. He's a Packer from like the early 2000s. KGB, good guy, Christian guy, and I had interviewed him in the locker room there. And one of the things I said when I first met him, I shook his hand and I said, hey, I just want you to know I'm not going to ask you a single question about football because I'm not interested in that. And he went, praise God. I am so happy. He's like, I'm so tired of talking about football. And, it's like talking about your job. And the same thing for me. If I'm out and trying to relax, I don't want to have a conversation about, how much money is left on the roof or the parking lot or whatever. I want to I just want to talk about other things. I love talking about theology and religion, which is very intimately involved in church. But, if I'm out on a break, I don't want to talk about, the door or a tile that got wet from the last rain or snow melt or something. And so I knew he was a Christian. So I talked to him about Christianity, which was something I knew he was very excited about. and it's something he doesn't get a lot of time to talk about. We had a great conversation. I audio taped, recorded, I should say, the conversation. And I was able to write an interview for a local newspaper in Wisconsin about it. It was great, but it took research. It says, as I write this chapter, he says, I have before me a letter to a Boy Scout guy. And this was interesting. This guy was going to the Boy Scouts. He wanted to send one of his kids, one of his boys, to this European jamboree, he said. I don't know what that entails, but it was a big deal. This was back in the day when the Boy Scouts only had boys. Now the Boy Scouts are no longer the Boy Scouts. They're now the Scouts because they have girls and boys. But anyway, so he says here that it just so happened that the guy in charge had just written his first $1 million check for a donation or something. And the check had come back because, it got endorsed and it got stamped and it got cashed, and the check came back again a long time ago when that happened. And he framed that check, that $1 million check. And so the guy was genuinely interested. He genuinely wanted to see a $1 million check. It's like looking at a $1 million bill almost. So he asked about this $1 million check, and he was really interested, genuinely interested. And he said that he talked about this check and how great this was and all this other stuff. And that's all he talked about, was just how amazing it was. He's going to tell his kids all about it when he gets back, the Boy Scouts, his little troop he's got. Anyway, all said and done, never asked about the money. Then the guy he was talking to says, well, anyway, what was the reason you're here? And then he says, oh, well, I'm looking to try to send one of my kids. Well, it ends up that all said and done, not only did the guy send that kid, he ended up sending like 4 or 5 kids, and the Boy Scout leader as well paid for the trip. And then the kids, they stayed there for 6 weeks or 7 weeks in Europe on his dime, which is just a great example of just how nice a person can be if you show some interest. Says, so when I saw him the next day, I began talking about the greeters. And this is another complaint. Again, just the guy was just wanting to this guy is interested in the greeters, for example. This was a club of people. It still exists. But a good example would be if you go to Facebook, like let's say you have an interview tomorrow. Really smart idea would be to go and research that person, whoever it is. And then go in their Facebook page and then look at their interests. So I don't know what my interests are on Facebook. I haven't fiddled with that in forever, but I'm sure it says religion, philosophy, camping. It probably says a couple of those things. Reading books, maybe some authors I enjoy. I have no idea. I'm sure that there's something there. So the smart thing to do would be to go, okay, I'm having an interview. What is this person into? And then you see the person's into boating or golf or whatever. And then you just take a little bit of time to just refresh your mind about what is going on in the world of golf right now. What's going on right now, and having those conversations. So that when studying that, so that when you have those conversations, you can say, hey, let's talk about something you're interested in. And it works. Telling you, it works. It's great. Just recently, I was talking to, I'm not going to say what company it was, but it's a company in town that I frequent. And I was talking to the manager, just asking this person about their day and just genuinely interested. Like, how are you doing with the pandemic? And this is conversations I had over, weeks and months since stores started opening back up. And I was just chatting again. And then during those conversations, which majority of the conversation was me listening to their complaints about, not being able to serve and all these kinds of things. And I just happened to mention that I had to go pick up paper. I had to go pick up printer paper after I was done. Just a kind of a throwaway kind of comment like, oh yeah. And after this, I got to go pick up some printer paper. And this company has nothing to do with printing. It has nothing to do with printing paper. But because of the conversations we've had and all this other stuff, they said, oh, well, it's funny. We just bought a new printer. It takes this special kind of paper. So I have a whole entire brick and a half of just paper. And we're just using it for scrap paper, but I'd love for you to have it because you'd actually use it. And I was like, hey, heck yeah. So they ended up giving us like 15 to 20 some dollars worth of paper. And I just took it and went home with it. And it was great. But it all started with me genuinely caring about the other person's situation. It says, so talk in terms of other people's interests. And then finally, number 6, how to make people like you instantly. He says, what is there about him that I can honestly admire? He says, ask yourself that question. Because everybody you meet, for the most part, everybody you meet has something that you can go, you know what? I admire the fact that you're into that. So, I mean, with my own children, when my kids were little, I genuinely admired my kids' interest in this one cartoon called My Little Pony. My Little Pony had come out. It was a new series. It was around in the 80s. To be honest, I didn't care for it back then. But my daughters and my son loved it. And I was just curious. I was genuinely curious about why they thought it was so good. And so I was talking with them, and they were so excited, and I'm listening to them. And then we went on YouTube and we watched some videos of people saying, hey, this is why this show is so great. All said and done, they had redone the whole entire show. And I guess they had based the 5 main characters on the 5 basic psychological breakdown and traits. There's like the 5 basic personalities. And they were a caricature of each of those personalities, which is the point, so that every kid can identify with one of the characters. And they were dealing with some really good relationship stuff. And it was goofy and funny, but it was good. It was well done. Anyway, so I just was showing genuine interest and admiration. I was really genuinely like, wow, you really know a lot about this topic. Being that you're my child, I should probably know a little bit about this thing that you can quote. And all said and done, I started watching it with my kids. And we watched every episode of every season over time. I mean, it took a long time to do it, but we watched every episode of every season until the show ended. And it was a great show. And it was something that my kids and I could share together. And it all started with me just genuinely being interested in what my kids were doing and admiring their commitment to understanding why the show was good. So anyway, page 100. He says here, if we are so contemptibly selfish that we can't radiate a little happiness and pass on a bit of honest appreciation without trying to get something out of the other person in return, if our souls are no bigger than sour crab apples, we shall meet with failure that we deserve so richly. Again, with the person I had been talking to about about the pandemic and everything, I never expected anything. Never was trying to get anything free or trying to get anything out of it. I genuinely wanted to just let them know that I understood and that I sympathized with their situation, and that me coming to their place of business and frequenting their place of business was me trying to help. But I wanted nothing in return. And he's saying that you have to get to a place in your heart. And this is for Christians. This is something that this is one of the real principles that we should walk away with, is that, you got to want to help others and love others for the pure sake of loving others and helping others. He says, I wanted I wanted something. I wanted something priceless, and I got it. I got the feeling that I had done something for this person without his being able to do anything for me in return. Just wanting to do something for somebody. Always make the other person feel important. He quotes John Dewey, famous for the Dewey Decimal System at your local library. Also a very famous atheist philosopher of education. I enjoy his books. William James, famous Christian psychologist. William James, William James says, the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. How true. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He says that's the basic principle of this last chapter here. He says every religion has been teaching it for millennia. He says you want to he says you want the approval of others. He says you want recognition, you want a feeling that you are important, and you crave sincere appreciation. Those are the things you want. You want approval and recognition, and you want to feel important. Everybody does. Everybody wants to be appreciated at the end of the day. So he says, that's what you want. Give that to somebody else. Just because you're not receiving appreciation doesn't mean you can't give somebody else appreciation. So the question is, the golden rule, he says, how, when, where? And he says the answer is all the time, everywhere. This is a basic principle that I try very hard to just practice. I I don't know if I told this story, but I was in line at the Kohl's right after Christmas. People are grumpy. Everybody's upset. No one is talking. Everybody's irritable. And this lady is behind me with her cart, and my wife is next to me. And everybody's irritable. So I'm like, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if I could make this better. So what I did was I put my foot back and I kicked this lady's cart. And I said, lady, you just hit me in the back of my leg. And she goes, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And so I waited like, I don't know, a couple of seconds, and I kicked her cart again. It's like, lady, seriously. And I turned away again. And she goes, I didn't even move that time. And then I kicked it again, and I was like, what is your problem? And she goes, I didn't. And then I started laughing, and then she hit me with her purse. And then everybody in line was laughing. Everybody thought it was really funny. Everybody was happy. And then all of a sudden, the whole entire line, everybody's talking to each other. People are making comments and laughing and joking. And, it was just an opportunity to just take an awful situation. No one wants to be at the returns line at Kohl's, especially now that they take Amazon returns. And it's just, it's great for them. I'm glad that they're expanding their business model, but it's still awful. And it was just a way to lighten the be and why wouldn't you want to be that for other people? You want to be grumpy and irritable, or would you rather be the person that people are like, I really liked that person when they left? He gives an example from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where my wife graduated from college. I'm not going to read it, but just funny. It's kind of neat that he wrote that in there. He talked about how soda. He says, great silence ensued, realizing the cash box. Oh, so this is interesting. So Eau Claire, Wisconsin, this guy was having to work with the refreshments booth at a charity concert. These two ladies were arguing over who's going to be in charge and who's going to be, who's going to have the authority and who's going to run the show. And they were fighting and arguing. And then he was given the money box. And the money box represents authority. And so he has this wise epiphany. And he says, I'm going to give the money box to this woman, and I'm going to have the other woman be in charge of all the volunteers, these teenage volunteers. He gave them both positions of authority. And by doing that, he appeased both of their need to be important, because they just wanted to be important and they wanted to feel appreciated. And he calls this a philosophy of appreciation. He said, just showing a little bit of respect. He says, little phrases such as, I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you be so kind as to? Won't you please? Would you mind? Even if the person serves you. One of the things, ladies out there, men too, but ladies, if you're in the world and you're looking to date and a guy takes you out to dinner or whatever, if he treats the waitstaff poorly, don't date him anymore. If the guy you're with or the girl you're with is rude to the waitstaff, they're going to be rude to you. They might treat you like a princess right now, but if they treat the people who serve them like garbage, then they're not worth your time. Even with wait staff, even people who are you're paying to help you, there's no reason why you can't say thank you. Would you mind? If your food comes back and it's not quite done right, you don't have to go like, this is a bunch of garbage. Like the waitress or waiter didn't do that. They didn't make your meal. Just say, hey, would you mind? Sorry to trouble you. Just some very real examples of how you can do that, how you can apply this. He talks about, on page 104, he talks about how this teacher had created this sign for his classroom. It says, you are important. Just trying to tell the kids, you're important. You matter. You as individuals matter. You are important. It says the unvarnished truth is that almost all the people you meet feel themselves superior to you in some way. And a sure way to their hearts is to let them realize in some subtle way that you recognize their importance and recognize it sincerely. Remember what Emerson said. He says, every man I meet is my superior in some way. In that I learn from him. I have a couple of books from Emerson over here, and he absolutely said that. And it's a great summary, in my opinion, of this chapter. Just this idea that everybody you meet is a superior in some way. Everybody you meet knows more about something than you do, without a doubt. I mean, even, you take Einstein or some other person you think is a genius, they're ignorant about something. Einstein, for example, was horribly ignorant about relationships. He was not a good husband. Even though he was a genius with other things, he had a lot to learn about how to treat a spouse. And it would have been great for him to just look for somebody who had a happy marriage, and just looking for those things. Everybody has something to learn from everyone. And then finally, all said and done, jumping all the way to the end here, it says, talk to people about themselves. Talk to people about themselves, and they will listen for hours. He says, so principle number 6, make the other person feel important. And here's the important part, do it sincerely. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So that is our chapter. So on page 112, you'll see, which I love this. In a nutshell, he says, he gives a list. And here is our list. Principle 1, become genuinely interested in other people. Smile is number 2. Smile is number 2. Number 3, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of the other person's interests, not just your own. And then make the other person feel important, but do it sincerely. So there it is. There is our, this book's old. There are the principles 1 through 6 in a nutshell of the 6 ways to make people like you. And we'll start part 3 next week, how to win people to your way of thinking. So this is going to be the art of persuasion. Again, we're not talking about manipulation. We're talking about persuasion. And this is very important, especially for the Christian, because we read in the book of Acts, for example, and throughout the writings of Paul specifically, where Paul says, I went to the synagogue and persuaded or attempted to persuade people to understand and accept the gospel. Helping people understand and persuading people with a good argument and actually being able to articulate your view well is not manipulation. That is just learning how to be persuasive and to teach people things. One of the best things you can do is learn how to be persuasive without being rude and without being insincere. And if you're trying to teach somebody something that's very important, you need to persuade them to believe it. Every teacher needs to know the art of persuasion to try to help people understand what they're learning and to persuade them to study further and learn more. Because, how else do you get somebody to really get on fire for a topic? You have to persuade them to get excited. So anyway, that's going to be the topic for next week. I encourage you guys to keep up with the reading. God bless you and have a great day. And I will see you on Sunday.